Well, we can talk now to the UN Secretary-General Ban Ki-moon, who joins me from the World Economic Forum in Davos. Secretary-General, thank you very much for joining us here on BBC World News. I wonder your reaction, first of all, to the death of King Abdullah of Saudi Arabia.
I'm very saddened by the passing of King Abdullah of Saudi Arabia. I still remember my meeting with the King Abdullah during the height of Gaza crisis, August last year in Jeddah. As a king of Saudi Arabia, he made a tremendous contribution, not only in modernizing Saudi Arabia, but also a great contribution to a Middle East peace process. He was a great supporter of this interfaith dialogue, and he supported the United Nations counter-terrorism strategy, helping establish United Nations Counter-Terrorism Center. And I'm also very much grateful for his being a great humanitarian champion. When the world was hit by world food crisis in 2008, he was the first world leader who came out with a very generous contribution. And in addition to this, he helped the United Nations deliver humanitarian assistance to many difficult places, to tens of thousands of people who needed support.
Mr. Ban, despite that,
I'm looking forward.
Sorry to interrupt you, Mr. Ban. Despite that great progress in modernising Saudi Arabia that you describe, a lot of expressions of concern about Saudi Arabia's human rights record. Amnesty International only an hour ago was calling Saudi Arabia a human rights-free zone. What is your perspective on that issue?
We have been discussing this matter, particularly including the women empowerment and human rights. I hope that with the new King Salman, the Saudi Arabia will make progress in improving human rights situation in Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. United Nations is committed in making sure that the human rights and human dignity all around the world is respected and promoted.
I want to turn to another situation very much in the news headlines today. The Human Rights Office of the UN was talking about the current fighting in Ukraine being the worst since the ceasefire was declared in September. I mean, what can the UN actually do about it, particularly given that Russia is a permanent member of the UN Security Council?
The current situation and ongoing fighting around the Donetsk and Luhansk, that's a source of a great concern. The international community has been expressing serious concern and trying to urge them, the parties concerned, to engage in a dialogue. They have a very solid foundation of agreement. This the protocol and agreement for a peaceful resolution of this issue. I sincerely hope that they will abide by this protocol and agreement. They cannot resolve this issue through only military means. They should be resolved by peaceful means through dialogue. And the United Nations will continue to monitor human rights situation. We will continue to deploy a human rights monitoring mission in Ukraine.
But do you have optimism that this situation can be resolved through United Nations measures?
Yes, there is a Minsk protocol which has been agreed by the parties concerned. This is a very solid agreement. This must be implemented as soon as possible.
Yeah.
And I have been engaging with President Putin and President Poroshenko and other regional leaders to help United Nations facilitation to bring peace and stability as soon as possible. In the meantime, we are doing all what we can to deliver humanitarian assistance as well as human rights monitoring mission.
You will accept that that's the main thrust of those whole agreements made in Minsk are still yet to be implemented. There's very scant evidence on the ground that anything has changed. They should continuously discuss this matter through dialogue.
I'm urging again that President Poroshenko and the President Putin continue to discuss this matter. We are ready to facilitate such a dialogue. I'm also encouraged that many European leaders are heavily engaged in this process.
I want to turn to something that President Hollande of France mentioned in his speech today, the issue of climate change. Those Paris climate change talks are coming up at the end of this year. Would you just fill us in on what the concrete climate change goals are for the next few months?
Climate change is a defining issue of our time. We have been discussing this matter during the last 2 decades without making any solid agreement. With this climate summit meeting, which was held in September last year at the United Nations, there is a big momentum generated. The European Union has taken a very ambitious target, reducing 40% of greenhouse gas emissions, and United States and China have also discussed this matter and agreed to a very ambitious reduction of greenhouse gas emissions. We do not have much time. We must have a universal and meaningful climate change agreement in Paris in December. United Nations will mobilize all necessary political will and trying to forge a partnership with the business communities and civil societies to promote the stronger partnership. We must build upon the momentum generated during last climate change summit meeting.
Mr. Ban, we have one of the most turbulent situations in the Middle East in living memory, perhaps. We have an Ebola crisis in West Africa, many other challenges. What are the priorities for the United Nations in 2015?
The United Nations has 3 priorities in 2015. We are now facing multiple crises, geopolitical, social, economic, and environmental issues. Among these environmental issues, we must have a climate change agreement agreed, and also to promote and to shape post-2015 development agenda. The member states of the United Nations are working very hard to shape sustainable development agenda with a set of sustainable development goals. These are priority issues of the United Nations. At the same time, we have to address this spreading extremism and terrorism. The ISIL and Daesh and the Boko Haram, they have committed unspeakable brutality against the humanity. Whole international community, led by the United Nations, must mobilize all capacity and resources to these crimes against humanity. Those are priorities which we have to do. This is the year for global action and transformation.
Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, thank you very much indeed for joining us on BBC World News.
Thank you very much.